There's another slide here I think that we're missing, but it talks about Meshry implementing service mesh performance and it doing a lot around performance management. So if we get a moment, I'll try to do a quick demo of that. It does these various functions, these various management functions across more service meshes than any other product or project in the world. It does so in part with its compatibility with SMI, and it also does so by having a dedicated adapter to each specific service mesh, so that those individual service meshes, the differentiated value of the individual service mesh can be brought forward in the tool and exposed. So I apologize for speaking a little bit quickly if I am just anxious about the training that's going to start here shortly. A word on Meshry's architecture. Somewhat simplistic in nature. Meshry is intended to be extensible, has three areas of extension. One of those is in terms of an individual adapter written to an individual type of service mesh. Another area of extensibility is to have different providers. I think a good example of what we mean by provider in this case is that as you go to use Meshry as a tool, you can use it as in single user mode, or essentially no user mode. Download the open source, install the open source tool, and choose to use it as you would maybe a Swiss Army knife, or maybe you leave it running for a long time, maybe you don't. Or you can choose to authenticate to a provider like the university, like one of these universities. As you go to run a performance test and those results come back in, you can choose to share those results with a provider so that they can continue research in the case of the university. And also so that as you go to pull down Meshry and run it on a different machine later, if you use that same provider, you can retrieve the history of your performance results. So we'll look at that. And there's an API for different clients to interface with. Part of the point of this API is that Meshry is intended to be embedded into each of the participating service meshes into the project's pipelines. So as a given project, like Open Service Mesh, for example, goes to make a release, that they would embed Meshry as part of that pipeline to do a couple of things. One is to do SMI conformance, make sure that that release continues to be SMI conformant. Also to run a standard set of tests as defined in service mesh performance, so that they can do a good job of tracking, making sure that they're not regressing in their own performance of that mesh. Nice. I think I'm just sharing Safari at the moment. Let me maybe share the desktop just to give all of you a quick demo of the tool. What it looks like, what it looks like to use as a user. So hopefully we're seeing the whole screen here. And so, nice. Meshry supports a number of different platforms. So it's meshry.io. So a couple of things maybe to point out here before we start running the tool, and that is to say that of those that are using one of the remote providers that I was talking about to send in their test results, we've been fortunate that many of the users have sent in their test results for analysis. At some point, we'd really like to be able to publicly, anonymously say, here's the general overhead involved in running a mesh, or here's how well people run it or don't. Part of the goal of SMP, which is at smp-spec.io, is to define a new index by which a new yardstick, if you will, for people to easily and quickly say, hey, this is my mesh mark. this is, I'm running my service mesh and my workloads, my environment, they're running at an 83 mesh mark, which has relevance and meaning to them in their environment, which is good. And they can measure that over time and see how well they're doing, but that they could also compare to their neighbor, if you will. And so while SMP is a specification, the canonical implementation of it is in Meshry, and this is just kind of a sort of a recording of the ability to run a performance test, analyze the results, do some statistical analysis, and download that result set, that statistical analysis, and a bunch of information about the environment into the SMP format, and for that to be shared. If I were to guess, HashiCorp has been probably the longest ongoing supporter of this effort. So my guess would be at Console would be maybe the next, or that we would see Console as maybe the one next to implement. So on back to Meshry, what was the other thing that I was going to point out here? I don't. You should all know what I was about to say. I can't remember it. I think it was something about the platform, just the number of platforms that are trying to, that the community behind this is trying to support. And they're doing an all right job. Actually, just a call for assistance. If anyone is intrigued by the tool and you happen to be running OpenShift, boy, PR is welcome, or rather, it doesn't take a PR, just verify that the thing runs. And so speaking of it running, you can use Brew to install it. It uses a Meshry CTL, not Meshry Cuddle, just for the record. And has some common commands that you might begin to expect. So things to do performance testing, things to do lifecycle management around service meshes, things to manage Meshry as an application itself. Meshry will run either in Docker as a Docker Compose app or in Kubernetes, either one. Sometimes you want to run a load generator and a performance management tool like Meshry in cluster or maybe out of cluster. So I think if you're not paying attention and you just go to start up Meshry, the default method here is that, well, one, it'll update itself, and two, start in Docker locally. So on my machine, I'm just on a Mac, I'm running Docker Desktop, a beautiful tool for running Kubernetes locally as well. Meshry starts up, it automatically detects what Kubernetes your user is connected to, which is nice. It then will connect to any of its own adapters. This doesn't mean that you're running these meshes right now, but that Meshry, this instance of Meshry is capable of managing these different types. You can run multiple instances of the same type of adapter or remove them. Really, as an open source project, trying to facilitate different release channels and give people easy control over switching between something that's stable and something that's bleeding edge. Meshry ends up connecting to common telemetry tools that are often deployed with the service mesh itself. And so in this environment, I think I'm running Istio at the moment, but I don't remember. And so I don't know if these are, yeah, if Prometheus and Grafana are actually running, they're not. So maybe the only thing to show that I had said that I would show is like the ability to do a performance test. This page is one of those interfaces to do it, that you give people choice over what type of load generator that they want to run. There's a difference between the algorithms that each of these use and how they test performance, which is a discussion for another time. SMI, I wish that I had some SMI results here to show you, but the conformance results show here as well. The performance test results, I don't know if there's, these are like very short tests that I was just running. And actually this helps articulate part of the difference between this load having been generated and run on using Fortio as the load generator, and kind of the statistical analysis that it does in terms of how much load it generated, and all the analysis that it does, as versus using WRK2 as a load generator and it doing a different analysis, or doing its analysis in a different way. Part of so I didn't disconnect Grafana in the right way, and that's why we're seeing those errors. But anyway, suffice to say, you can, this helps users do things like make a change in their environment and compare the differences between the performance of those two different tests, and tells you what your tests were. It helps track the config of your environment, what your Kubernetes cluster was like at the time, what type of config your service mesh has, and things. And so I think, for my part, just speaking on behalf of the community that's behind Meshry and SMP, I think it was always the intention that these tools would be proposed for, donation to the CNCF. So that's what I've been focused on. Questions?
No questions yet in the chat. So we have a few minutes for the.
That's good. Yeah. Which is nice. I mean, I could talk about service meshes like all day. I'm trying not to. I need to go prepare for the workshop that I'm going to deliver.
That's awesome. Yeah. All right. So if there are no more questions, we will wrap this thing. Right. So thank you for joining us today. We had a fantastic time here with four presenters covering various topics. So we also may consider running these similar events in the future. So please consider joining us as a speaker or as an attendee in the future. Thank you again, and goodbye. We'll see you online.